July weekend, so hope everybody's having good plans for tomorrow and safe plans. Expect some people are traveling and doing other things today. As I mentioned last Sunday, about the Lama Street, we're still in the process of going through having them fix all the things that they were supposed to have done initially. And so we did sign another extension of the buy-sell agreement at end of June for another 2 months. I could be wrong, but I think the only thing that's left is getting that water tank put in, but I haven't heard from Craig about the timeline for that. And so, as far as I've been told, most of the other things that they needed to do have been corrected by now. Larry, do you have anything to add?
That's the last I heard, it was a water tank.
Yeah, just waiting for that to be done. They have approved it. I imagine they're trying to get it taken care of. Charmaine asked about COVID, so I'll go over that again. If you've been exposed, if you've been to somebody's home or been around somebody you found out that you've been exposed, the present recommendations is for you to quarantine for 5 days. Test yourself on day 1. If it's negative, you should test again at about day 3 or 4. And if you're negative, then you can go about your business. Now, if you come down ill with something, and at this moment there's the COVID going around, but there's also the flu and a cold. And so if you come down, that all have initially the same type of symptoms. And so if you become ill, the recommendation is for you to test yourself when you first become ill. And if you're negative, still quarantine and test yourself again in day 3 to 5. And if negative, then you don't have the COVID, you have something else. Come in. Most of us would fit the category that further treatment would be recommended. And presently there is an oral antiviral called Paxlovid. It's a combination of 2 medicines and the monoclonal antibody. The best treatment of preventative is actually the vaccination, so everybody should have gotten their second booster. Paxlovid and monoclonal work the best if you get treated fairly quickly. And the present recommendations are basically you have to test positive and you have to have symptoms and you have to be high risk. Being the age that most of us here puts us automatically in that high risk group. People that have some kidney problems or liver problems are on some other medications might not qualify for the Paxlovid. You can't have any kidney problems to take that or liver problems, which is oral medication. That one you can actually get through most of your primary care doctors. If you call them and say, I tested positive and you meet the criteria and they know that you don't have any problems that would disqualify you, they can actually send a prescription in. Many of the pharmacies, such as KTA, actually carry it. They have to be sent a form that documents that there's no exclusions. The monoclonal antibody, unfortunately, is still an IV preparation and has to be pretty much given at the hospital. So if somebody becomes ill enough and positive enough and doesn't qualify for the oral medication, then they need to go to the hospital. Both help keep people from getting very, very sick. Again, getting vaccinated is the most important thing for that. The Paxlovid has been associated with a few people having rebound symptoms after they finish the 5-day treatment. That is, they take the treatment, feel better, finish it, and feel worse for a while. the hospital counts and the county counts have been going down. They're still pretty high, but they've been going down. This particular variant doesn't seem to be causing anywhere near the severity of the illness that the previous one did. While there's a number of people in the hospital with COVID, most of them what we consider incidental, they're there for something else. That is, they came in with a heart attack or some other reason that they were in the hospital and they tested positive. I don't think, the last I heard in the last week, there's nobody with COVID on the ventilator in the ICU. So that's all good news with that. And fairly good news, of course, is the younger kids can now get vaccinated. What that will do, while they tend not to get anywhere as sick as their grandparents, it will cut down the pool of the circulating virus by quite a bit, and maybe it will help us from getting more and more surges. Any questions on those two things? Yes, Lance?
I drive up to KL, just by shipment, somebody over there with all these signs basically saying that the vaccine caused all of these deaths. And then I heard on a Christian station the information that stuff was based on basically was a study, 5-year study. And they compared that 5 years before 2021, and then they did a correlation thing that showed that there were lots more deaths in 2021. And they're saying, that the guy in KL that has all the signs saying that he did die because of the vaccine. And the study I looked at didn't say that, but
yeah, there's
I thought if you had seen that, if you would comment about that, because
I haven't seen it, but there's a lot of people spreading a lot of misinformation. Our information age has turned into a misinformation age. You can put pretty much anything out. I don't know if any of you get the Tribune Herald, for example. Both the Tribune Herald and the Star Advertiser put their Saturday papers online, but the Tribune Herald on that day has a not real news section, and they have a lot of things like that that people put out on the social media and say where it came from. People are always making false claims, but also making false pictures and putting these things out, and a lot of people believe them. People believe things because it's written. It's really, really true that there's a lot more deaths in 2021 than there was in the years before, and even more deaths than just from COVID. But why? What was the reason that we had so many deaths, extra deaths last year? What killed them? What killed 1 million of us last year? COVID did. Okay, and you got to realize that to really be counted as a COVID death, the doctor, me, has to put that down as the cause of death. And the health department has to investigate that and say that that's true. And so sometimes things are a little bit sticky to figure out exactly what the cause of death is. Somebody is 95 years old and has a bad heart and been dwindling for quite a while because of all their medical problems in their age, and they get COVID and they die. The doctor sometimes will not put COVID as the primary cause of death. Early on in the epidemic, people were dying at home and they were not getting autopsied and tested. They didn't have it then, and so the people that actually do good science with this feel that the actual amount of people dying from COVID is maybe a third more than the absolute number stated. So yes, there was a lot more deaths in 2021 than usual. The reason for it was COVID. It had nothing to do with the virus. Some people estimate that millions of people are alive today because they got the virus, this vaccine, not because they died from the vaccine. There's no free lunch. There's always something that carries some risk. Driving here from home puts you at risk of somebody running into you with a semi. Or you just waking up this morning, we're at the age that some days we're not going to wake up. You know, there's always a risk to everything that we do. And the vaccines are very, very safe, but they're not without a small amount of people having side effects. Sometimes the people that get on, I'm sorry, I'm getting on a bandwagon about natural things and things like that. Nature isn't here just for us. It's generally for their benefit. And so, example, it's chocolate. Chocolate is something that we really like, and that's because our liver developed enzymes to metabolize chocolate. And so we grow chocolate. And chocolate was itself a tree that made that so that animals would spread their seeds. What happens when a dog eats chocolate? They die. Their liver isn't able to metabolize chocolate. And so some of the most toxic chemicals around are natural chemicals, nothing man-made. So some of the most toxic things are natural. And so just throwing a label on something doesn't make it true. But there's a lot of misinformation. I mean, I'm going to say very clearly, I'm a Democrat, and Trump has been lying. And continues to lie. But there's a lot of people that believe him. And in the news this morning, they had a GOP election for primary in Georgia, and the governor won quite handily, 74. A guy that got 3% of it says it was stolen from him. So people are saying these things, and some people pick them up. Anyway, people will say things because they want to believe that. People don't look at information unless they really struggle to be fair and unbiased. They always pick what they want to hear. And so it's really easy to go to a news site and listen to things that you believe them saying that. But if you really want to be educated and understand, you need to listen to both sides and try to figure out what is correct. Because if you just pick up the things that you feel is true and reinforce that, you're going to go down the rabbit hole. As my training, I was trained not to do that, because you can lead yourself into big errors by, dentist tells me these symptoms, I believe this is what he's wrong. I mean, what's wrong with him, but he has other things, maybe he has something else going on, but I only listen to the things I think fits the diagnosis I gave him. That's a major medical error. It really has a name for it. And so you need to keep your ears open for other things. So it's good to listen to see what the guy said, and then what you did was correct. Try to go back and find out where the information comes from. Because a lot of times they'll distort it. And switching over to our Bible study, people distort the Bible. They'll take one verse out of it and make a big doctrine out of that, and it's important not to do that. And also it's important to understand the context of what is written. The Synoptic Gospels, talking about the New Testament, really are 4 different showings of what Jesus' life was and what he meant for. The letters are really that. What we're studying is a letter to the Corinthians. It's a letter to them. And it's a letter like I'm writing to you, Lance. You had sent me questions, or we have a problem, and this is a letter dealing with those issues. It's not a thesis outlining exactly what Christianity is. It's a letter. And so it's important to understand the context about that. And so sometimes it's important to try to understand it, which is what we're doing, but it's important not to take one verse and only look at that. But we have a free country. And so people can do what this guy's doing. I think he's very wrong, and I think most people, seeing how many people are vaccinated, don't believe him either, but he can, as long as he's not obstructing traffic, he can be out there. And so, since you asked that question and got me going, you get to start us off with prayer today. Yes.
Really couple, let us pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for Dr. Belcher and his leading this Bible study. We just ask that you minister to our hearts and minds, that we absorb and learn and go deeper in our faith. We ask this and your blessings to our families, our church, and our loved ones. All of these things we ask in the precious and holy name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
And so going back to this, the 2 Corinthians is actually the third letter. We don't have the letter in between 1st and 2nd Corinthians, where Paul had been dealing with some problems at the Corinthian church that he had founded. And the third letter, which is what we call 2nd Corinthians, is he's responding a bit to the problems that came out of the second letter, where he rebuked the Corinthians for some problems that they had. Apparently he considered it a severe letter, but we don't know exactly what was in it. But the next section is going to be the Christian ministry, an open statement of the truth, and this is 4:1 to 4:6. So Larry, 4:1, please.
Therefore, since through God's mercy we have this ministry, we do not lose heart.
We is the authoritative we in Greek. It's like the English Queen would say, we are not pleased. And so my friend always makes a joke about that when he's not pleased. So we are not pleased. It's the authoritative we, not I. So we use that. So this is the authoritative we. It really means Paul is the we there. Where does this ministry come from? Where does this ministry come from?
Jesus.
Yeah, from God. So it's not a ministry of him, it's not a ministry of Paul, it's a ministry that God gave him. And that he has this ministry as a gift from God. And this is God's mercy for us. Because, as we've been talking about, all of us are sinners, and therefore all of us deserve death, which is what we've been talking about the last few verses before this. Another way of saying is we do not lose heart is do not become discouraged. So we should not become discouraged with all that's going around us, because we have this mercy from God. We have this ministry. We have this gospel. Dennis 2, please.
Let be known secret, shameful weeds. We do not use deception, nor do we distort the word of God. On the contrary, by setting forth the truth plainly, we commend ourselves, including his conscience, in the sight of God.
And so this is quite as clear a statement as you can say about his integrity. You know, in our court system, we have people swear to tell the truth and only the truth. I think they still do that. But this is a fairly clear statement that he has renounced shameful things that lead to shame. You know, basically he's renounced any deception, any way of tricking people into his ministry. He doesn't distort anything that was from the Word of God. Everything is truthful. We talked last week or two about what the ancients meant by commend. They had a system where they would, if they wanted to have a relationship with somebody, they were moving, say, to a new town, they would take letters of commendation so that they were going into a certain business. Remember, Paul was like a tent maker. He might have letters from where he was living to where he's going to certain people he needed to interact with, people that supplied him services. And so self-commendation was not something thought of badly, because sometimes if you didn't know anybody, I would go up to Charmaine and say, I am, Paul, and I'm a tent maker, and you supply some of the equipment I need. I want to get in a business with you. I've done a good job with my tent making in the past. I know you don't know any of the people that I have letters from, but these are the people that can say that I do a good job and I'm honest with my dealing. And so that's what he's talking about here, that he's, it's not something pejorative in sometimes the way we look at self-commendation, where people are puffing themselves up. That's not really how they look at it back then. But if somebody told you these things, how would you feel about what they were saying? I renounce secret and shameful ways. I do not use deception. I do not distort. And basically, you can see this being true in the sight of God with the Holy Spirit. How would you feel about somebody saying that?
Feel pretty good about it.
Yeah, you should feel pretty good about it. He's telling you that I'm truthful, I'm not doing anything, and God is basically my witness, and you should be able to tell this thing should be fairly clear. You know, in this case, you know my track record. You know what I've done in the past, so you know I've not done these things. Okay, Charmaine 3, please.
And even if our gospel is
Veiled.
veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing.
Veil means, a covering over the face. And this is kind of carrying on from the verses that we just did, where he's talking about Moses being veiled and the first covenant being veiled to the Israelites. And so he's kind of carrying that on. And so he says, even if our gospel is veiled, it's veiled to the perishing. Who are the perishing?
Unbelievers.
The unbelievers. So who is the gospel not veiled to? I'm sorry?
Not veiled.
Who's the gospel not veiled to?
The believers.
The believers. And so the gospel is veiled to the perishing, the unbelievers. They can't understand it, they can't see it, but we should be able to see it. It's not veiled to us. Okay, Marlene, 4, please.
Verse 4, the God of this age has blinded the minds of unbelievers, so that they cannot see the light of the gospel that is praise the glory of Christ, who is in the image of God.
So who is the God of the age? The hint is it's not capitalized. Who is the God of this age?
Satan.
Yes, exactly. So Satan is the God of this age, and so he doesn't want us to have a relationship to Christ. And so he has blinded some people to Christ, is what Paul is saying here. So that's why not everybody can see that. You think that's true?
Yes.
Yeah. Why do you think that's true?
Well, Satan doesn't want us to maintain a relationship to be close
Right.
to God.
Yeah, and obviously,
That's
I'm sure there's people and peoples that have never heard the gospel, but it's for most places that's not true. And there's still a lot of people that don't believe. And so obviously there is some inability for them to understand. And I think Satan has a lot to do with it. I agree with that. Lance, fine, please.
For we do not preach ourselves, but Jesus Christ as Lord, and ourselves as your servants for Jesus Christ's sake.
So he's saying, I do not preach myself. I'm not preaching the glory of Paul. I'm not, this is not Paul's ministry. This is not Paul's this. This is not Paul's that. And we actually do have people that do that, but whose ministry is it? Who does he preach about? God, Jesus. And so he sees himself as a servant for Jesus. He's not making himself puffed up or making himself higher than the other people. He's a servant for Jesus. He's just, preaching for the Lord. He's not preaching for Paul. 6, please, Debbie.
For God, who said, "Let light shine out of darkness," made this light shine in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ.
So what did Christ say about himself as one of the great I am statements?
I am the light.
I am the light. And so, John has, 7, I think, I ams, something like that. And so that's one of them. I am the light of the world. What does it mean to be the light?
Because we believe in Jesus Christ and his Father, and Jesus is light. So we try to be like him.
So Jesus, I am the light of the world. I am what should show you the way, back then and now. In many ways we are visual people. And so that metaphor of light and darkness resonates with us. Nowadays we have lots of light, electrical lights, but back then they did not. They had little lamps. And so the dark was an easy place to stumble, to get lost, to get hurt, and have things that are frightening. And so it was a metaphor. God is the light. God is something that, and Jesus was to show us the way, to keep us from stumbling, to lead us to where we need to be. I'm sure there's more things that Pastor could say about the light, and Debbie might remember some more when we talked about it in John a while back. But it resonates with us as humans because in our senses the visual is the most important. And so we don't do well in a very dark environment. If any of you, I remember some years ago I'd gone out to watch the lava flow when it was going into the ocean off in the park, and it was in a ways over the dark lava, and I'd gone in with some friends, and we usually would go in when the sun was just going down, so you could get out there where you could see, and then watch the lava when the sun went down. On the way back, we ran into this family that did not bring any flashlights. And you know, and it had no moon, it just stars, and they were basically trying to crawl over that lava. So we helped them out. So we were a light for them. And so that's what they're trying to say, that we don't do well in the dark. So it's a metaphor that resonates with people even today, even though we have much more light. But these verses are fairly clear, all showing who he's preaching about, his integrity. So this is his defense of his ministry. You know, this is a section where he defended the ministry. Where this is a letter responding to some criticism Paul had gotten in Corinth. And so these verses are a defense of his ministry. He's basically saying that this is not Paul's ministry, this is God's ministry. I'm preaching for Christ, I'm a servant of Christ, and my integrity is impeccable. And so, you know, this is, in a legal arena, this might be your open statement of when you're having some disagreement, but this is his defense of his ministry. And we'll go on in the next section, which is 7 to 15, where he goes on and further defends his ministry by going through all the things that had afflicted him because of his ministry. The Corinthians were a relatively new city, and therefore their social stratification had not solidified, so people were looking for ways to move up. And so what they were some of the Corinthians believers were actually looking for what we would consider charismatic type of minister, somebody more of the promised type of ministry where Paul would be a really good speaker and really good health and have lots of money, and everybody, you know, treated him really well, which is, as we know, was not the case. And so he's showing that that type of thinking was worldly, that looking at the minister being somebody that was a very good speaker, that everybody liked him, that everybody thought he was great and gave him lots of money and lots of status, was not what Christ did. We know Christ didn't do that either. And so he's defending his situation where he suffered mightily, remember from Acts, in his ministry. He suffered all kinds of things. Shipwreck and flogging and stoning and all kinds of persecutions. But anyway, we'll go on with that. I think it's back to Larry 7, please.
But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all surpassing power is from God and not from us.
And what's the treasure he's talking about? What treasure is he talking about?
The gospel.
The gospel. And so he's talking about the gospel. So the gospel is something very, very treasured. It's something very valuable. But it's stored in the jars of clay. What's the significance of that? What did he mean by jars of clay? What was the significance of being in the jars of clay? We don't have them. Yeah, go ahead. I know you have a comment.
The supremely valuable message of salvation in Jesus Christ has been entrusted by God to frail and valuable human beings, jars of clay. Paul's focus, however, was not on the perishable container, but on its priceless contents, God's power dwelling in us. Though we are weak, God uses us to spread His good news, and He gives us power to do His work, knowing that the power is His, not ours. should keep us from pride and motivate us to keep daily contact with God, our power source. Our responsibility is to let people see God through us.
Equivalent nowadays might be saying a single-use plastic is the jars of clay. The ancients stored all kinds of things in jars of clay. Sometimes we're not talking about some of the jars that are highly painted that came down from that era that's in some museums. Because every day they made a very crude jar that they would put things in. And so, you know, our pottery is a lot more robust than theirs. What happens when you drop a jar of clay? A piece of pottery. It breaks. And so what he's saying is our treasure, the gospel, is in us who are really jars of clay, something that is very fragile. And in some ways our bodies are not very valuable. You know, that was probably the cheapest thing in the house is these jars that they put things in. Nowadays we tend to make them very nice and glazed, and so these would be unglazed pieces of pottery that were probably poorly fired, that they would almost immediately break if you dropped them very much at all. So people would understand that. We don't have that in our society, and it's not really the same saying in single-use plastic because that lasts forever, but it's showing that how insignificant the covering was for the treasure that was within, is what he's saying. Does that make sense? What?
A little bit.
A little bit. And what he's saying is that, you know, this great treasure is held within us. And so what Charmaine's commentator said is that that's the important thing. It's not, so in essence, what was important is not what Paul looked like, how he talked, how he looked, how much money he had. All those things were insignificant. What was important was the treasure within the gospel. And now he goes through 4 pairs of things. Dennis, 8 and 9, please.
We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, not abandoned. Struck down, but not destroyed.
And so he's basically going through these pairs that he says, I've been hard pressed, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. He has had hard times because of the gospel and the message. He's been able to persevere. And so we have these pairs of situations. But he can deal with it because of the gospel. You know, his life has been not easy. I don't know if I could have done that, what he does. You know, that's why sometimes he's thought to be one of the greatest evangelists of all times, obviously. It'd be hard to go through all that he went through. And I don't think we have to look down on people that can't always do as much as he did. Because there's not very many of us that can put up with that, even though we probably should. Okay, I think it's Charmaine now. 10, please. Or Dennis.
Okay.
Yeah.
We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus can also be revealed in our body.
Okay, so what's he trying to say here? Carry around the death of Jesus, so the life of Jesus may be revealed in our bodies. What's he trying to say here?
Well, if we were crucified with him, that Christ lives in us.
Yes. So his death lives in us because of his crucifixion.
Mm-hmm.
And then so what's the second part of that?
His resurrection.
Yes. And so he carries around the truth of the death of Jesus in his body. We all are going to die. But we have the life of Jesus because Jesus was resurrected. And we have the hope that we'll be resurrected also because of our belief in Jesus. And remember, in the ancient times, hope was not the wishy-washy hope that we sometimes use the word, but it was a confidence that that was going to happen. Okay, Marlene, 11, please.
Verse 11. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may be revealed in our mortal body.
And so he's going on saying pretty much the same thing, that we who are alive are being given over to death. We all are going to die. Death is 100%. And so we're all going to die, but we are going to be eternally alive because of Jesus' sacrifice. How does Jesus' life be revealed in our mortal bodies?
How we live our lives if we're trying to walk in his path.
Mm-hmm. And so I think that's the right answer. You know, we show his life in our mortal bodies when we try to emulate how he lived, you know, and show his sacrifice, his teachings, his commands. And so I think Debbie got it right, that in our mortal bodies we show his life by when we act Christ-like. And so, Lance, 12, please.
Well, so then death is at work in us, but life is at work in you.
Okay. So death is at work in us. We're all going to die. You know, that's the human condition. But all of us that believe also have life at work in us. Where does that life come from? Where does that life come from?
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, Jesus. So that's where the life comes from. Okay, Debbie, 13, please.
It is written, I believe, therefore I have spoken. With that same spirit of faith we also believe, and therefore speak.
I believe, therefore I have spoken is actually Psalms 116:10. Paul had been a biblical scholar before when he was known as Saul. And so we see that in many of his letters where he will make quotes from various sections of the Bible. This quote is actually from Psalms. And so he could speak. Why could he speak? Why could Paul speak?
Because he believed in
Because
what he was talking about.
He believed what he talked about. I know, I did debates in high school and college. And some of the, it's really easier to debate a position you really believe in. Of course, we often had to be, we were given also sometimes something we were arguing about that we didn't believe. But those were, to me, always the hardest. If you believe something, it's a lot easier to talk about it. If you believe something is a certain way, it's a lot easier than basically being deceptive, arguing about something you don't believe. To me, I think that's quite self-evident. for most of us, that if we really believe something, it's easy, a lot easier to try to talk about it, speak about it, share that, whatever that is. Whether or not it's the gospel or a cookie recipe or something, if we really believe that that is really good, then we can talk about it a lot easier. "14, please, Dennis. Dennis? 14, please.
Because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with him in his presence.
Okay. And so this again is the resurrection. So we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus, God, from the dead, that's the Easter message, will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you in his presence. And so Paul is believing that when we are all raised, in his case, he's going to be raised, and also with the people he knew, the Corinthians in particular, we're going to be raised with him. Does he say when this is going to happen? No, he doesn't say exactly when this happens. No, other than it will happen. A lot of things in life are like that. We know certain things are going to happen. We can't tell you exactly when it's going to happen. Charmaine, 15, please.
All this is for your benefit, so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God.
Do you believe that?
Yes.
That was quick.
This is
Yes.
what we try to do every day, huh? Share the gospel with others.
Yeah, but who is that for?
God's glory.
But no, who is it for? What does it say here? Who is it for?
For everybody?
What does the first phrase say?
All of this is for your benefit.
Right. This is for our benefit. What you're doing is correct. It also benefits them, but who does it really benefit? It's you. This is for your benefit. And so what you're doing, Marlene, is great, but it's really for your benefit.
I don't want to sound ignorant. But I gotta ask, how?
How?
I thought we need to share with unbelievers who God is so they can experience who he is.
That's true. That is very true.
So I cannot put together, because when I am being judged, would it be different?
I lost you there.
Step
Yeah.
Because as you bring people to Christ, you are storing up treasures in heaven. And so that's your destiny.
Okay.
It's a win-win. You can in our favor. You're getting something, and sometimes, especially if your message doesn't go out and be received, it's really your benefit. You are, as Debbie said, storing up treasures in heaven. It's improving your relationship with Christ. So this is for your benefit, even though it doesn't say, it's not a either or, it's an and.
Good conjunction, okay?
Okay. And so you are benefiting yourself, but you're also, if the message gets received, benefiting somebody else. But it's for your benefit. And it goes on with what you've been talking about. So why? So the grace can be shared for more and more people. Most commentators at this point regret the chapter division. Remember that in the original Greek, first of all, there wasn't punctuations, so the sentence structure it was assumed, and it was not made into verses and chapters. Those were put in hundreds of years later. And so the regret is actually the next 16 through 5:10 is actually one section. And it kind of goes on with what he's been arguing about, but it's actually talking about resurrection. So 16 and 17 and 18 really go along with 1 to 10 of 5. And so that's the regret the commentators have, that it's really not it really should have been broken differently, the best way to say it. And since I'm running out of time to really get into the next section, I think we'll close at this point. And so, any questions about what we're talking about? Paul is defending his ministry, but he will now start talking about other things that he needs to deal with them. And the next section, which we'll do next Sunday, is the resurrection. He talked about the resurrection in 1 Corinthians, and there's some slight differences here, but we'll go over that when we go through the next section. But the next section will be from 4:16 to 5:10. Larry, can you close this with prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for the lessons we learned today. We ask that we continue to carry throughout our work week and our time that we have with others, and we ask that you continue to watch over, guide us, and bless us till we meet again. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you.